Alongside the personal grief that all my family are feeling, we also share with so many of you in the United Kingdom, in all the countries where the Queen was head of state, in the Commonwealth and across the world, a deep sense of gratitude.
What would you do if someone you trusted most started quietly taking what didn't belong to them? What if the history you were meant to protect was suddenly at risk? For Camilla, life in the shadows had changed forever. Once overlooked, judged, and dismissed, she had risen to become Queen Consort. But with that title,
King's coronation next month, revealing a major change in the way that the Queen Consort
came temptation and a chance to rewrite her own story. Behind the polished walls of Buckingham Palace, plans were being made. Not for the good of the crown, not for the monarchy, but for her own family. Jewelry, lands, priceless heirlooms, everything carefully hidden under the guise of modernizing the royal legacy. On the surface, it seemed harmless, even practical. But could anyone really pull such a move unnoticed? And then there were those watching, loyal, vigilant, and unwilling to let history be rewritten. Could ambition blind someone so completely that they would risk it all? Could love survive when trust is broken in the highest places of power? This is the story of secrets, ambition, and betrayal at the heart of one of the world's most famous families. Every decision mattered. Every move could change the future. And the question remains, who would come out on top when family, loyalty, and legacy collide? A queen's hidden gamble. Camilla's story was never meant to be ordinary. For years, she lived in the shadows, observed but rarely accepted. Then, against all expectations, she stepped forward into the spotlight as Queen Consort. But there are certain boundaries that must never be crossed, and she reached for the one that mattered most, the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II. What seemed like harmless paperwork was, in truth, a quiet scheme. Assets belonging to the late Queen, priceless reminders of her reign, were being shuffled around under the banner of modernizing the monarchy. To the public, it could look like progress. But beneath the polished explanations, the changes weren't for the crown at all. They were leading towards Camilla's own family. Yet secrets like this rarely remain hidden. In the halls of Windsor, there was one person who would not look away. Princess Anne, Elizabeth's most loyal child, sharp-eyed and unbending, discovered what others missed. And when the truth was placed in front of King Charles, it set off a storm no one could have predicted. How could the man who once fought tradition for love make such an unforgiving choice? What did Camilla believe she stood to gain? And what did she ultimately lose? The summer of 2021 brought a warm glow to Buckingham Palace. In his private study, King Charles sat by the wide glass windows, as he had done for decades, sipping Earl Grey and sorting through his endless stacks of documents. At 76, his discipline was ironclad. Early mornings, precise routines, and the same quiet desk where duty always outweighed rest. On that morning, nothing felt unusual. The city outside buzzed with distant traffic, but inside all was calm. That calm ended the moment his secretary delivered a thick folder from Clarence House, Camilla's office. Charles, accustomed to the endless papers, assumed it was routine, estate updates, charity notes, perhaps reports on environmental investments he supported so passionately. He flipped through the pages with little interest until he reached the center. His chest tightened. These weren't simple numbers or estate summaries. Instead, they contained details about redistributing items belonging to Queen Elizabeth herself. His mother, whose reign had spanned over 7 decades, whose quiet smile and sharp gaze he could still see in memory. The pages spoke of jewels that had defined royal occasions, dazzling diamonds worn at coronations, treasured pearls that symbolized tradition, the landscapes of Scotland where she had found her peace, even rare paintings and delicate porcelain tied to centuries of history. To anyone else, They might have been objects. But to Charles, they carried the very soul of the dynasty. At first, the documents suggested a noble plan: place some items in museums for public view, use others to generate income for charities. But the signature at the bottom stopped him cold. It was signed not by him, not by the sovereign, but by Camilla, Queen Consort. No note, no message, no request for his approval. This wasn't a mistake. It was an overstep, deliberate and bold. Charles sat frozen, his hand gripping the page as memories of his mother's last private words at Windsor surged through him. "Preserve what I leave, Charles. These are not things. They are the spirit of the crown." And now, someone had moved them without his consent. For the first time in years, he wondered how far Camilla had gone, the woman who had stood with him through scandal, who had endured criticism to stand by his side. Was she now reaching for power beyond him? That night, the palace air felt heavier than ever. The golden light outside couldn't soften the storm rising inside Charles's heart. The fuse is lit. Clarence House had long been Camilla's sanctuary. Its gardens, its quiet halls,
Clarence House is now the official London home of Charles and Camilla.
All gave her a place away from public scrutiny. That evening, as she sat by the fireplace reading, Charles arrived without warning, carrying the same file that had shattered his peace earlier that day. Camilla greeted him warmly, offering her familiar smile and mentioning dinner waiting in the next room. But Charles's silence was different this time. He laid the folder on the table with a deliberate motion. His voice, calm but cutting, asked the question she had dreaded. "Why did you approve this without me? These are not things you can decide alone." Camilla rose slowly, softening her voice. She explained that Charles was often busy, caught in meetings, battling health issues, traveling on state visits. She claimed she had only wanted to ease his burdens, to bring order to items that were gathering dust. Her intentions, she insisted, were to free resources for education, for environmental causes, everything Charles himself had long supported. But her words did not calm him. Charles reminded her what those items represented: the coronation jewels, the quiet lands of Scotland, the very places where their mother had found solace. They weren't forgotten relics. They were living symbols, and she had acted as if his role meant nothing. Camilla pushed back, her tone sharper. The monarchy, she argued, couldn't stay trapped in the past. Wasn't modernization what Charles had always sought? Why cling so tightly to memories? Charles turned away. His disappointment was deeper than anger. For decades, they had endured storms together, scandals, criticisms, the shadows of Diana. But this was different. Trust had cracked, and once broken, it was hard to repair. That night, in his palace chambers, Charles lay awake, recalling the years they had shared, moments of joy, of passion, of survival. Yet those memories now carried a weight. The woman he had once risked everything for had made him doubt her intentions. And doubt, once planted, never sleeps. The tension between Charles and Camilla was only the beginning. At Clarence House, Camilla sought comfort not from her husband, but from her sister, Annabel Elliot. Known publicly as an interior designer for royal properties, Annabel carried a quiet ambition that few outside the family noticed. In a private drawing room, Camilla revealed the truth she hadn't dared admit to Charles. The plan wasn't just about reorganizing the Queen's legacy. It was about channeling those assets into her family's future. Some pieces would be sold discreetly, their value hidden behind layers of shell companies and offshore accounts. The profits, Camilla explained, would fund a luxury real estate venture, resorts in Scotland and Wiltshire, complete with fine dining managed by her son Tom, art galleries curated by her daughter Laura, and interiors designed by Annabel herself. It would be their own empire, independent of the Windsors, beyond the reach of tradition. But in Windsor Castle, Anne's instincts were already sharpening. With her aide Edward's help, she tracked the hidden accounts and coded transactions until the truth stood clear. The jewels, the lands, the sacred memories of her mother, they were being traded for Camilla's family's gain. Anne's fury was cold, steady, and unyielding. She placed the evidence before Charles, and in that moment, the fuse was finally lit. The storm was no longer coming. It had arrived. The breaking point. The evidence was impossible to ignore. Anne had handed Charles the proof that Camilla's plan was real. The jewels, the lands, the keepsakes that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II, every piece of her mother's legacy, was now tangled in secret deals and offshore accounts. Charles sat frozen in his study, staring at the papers. His hands shook, his face pale, and his heart ached. The betrayal felt personal and sharp, cutting deeper than any political scandal ever could. Anne's voice broke the silence. She's been planning this for months. Annabelle, Tom, Laura, they're all involved. Mother's memory is being sold, and they're using it to build their own empire. Charles could hardly believe it. He had spent his whole life preparing to honor his mother, to carry the crown with respect. And now the woman he loved, the one who had stood beside him through decades of scandal, had turned against everything he cherished. For a brief moment he wanted to deny it, to hope that something had been misunderstood. But every signature, every transaction, every coded email told him the truth. Camilla had been deceiving him, and the monarchy itself. That night, he could not sleep. He walked through the corridors of Buckingham Palace, past the portraits of kings and queens who had endured wars, betrayal, and scandal. Their painted eyes seemed to watch him, urging him to act, demanding that he uphold the legacy of the crown. He knew what he had to do, but even knowing, it hurt, deeply. The next morning, Charles summoned Camilla to Buckingham Palace. The air in the room was thick with tension, heavy enough to feel like it pressed on the skin. Camilla entered as usual, her calm demeanor hiding the storm she could sense brewing. She tried to offer her familiar smile, but Charles could see the flicker of fear in her eyes. On the table between them sat the folder of evidence Anne had delivered. Charles did not raise his voice, but his words hit like steel. "Why did you do this without telling me?" "These are not yours to decide alone." Camilla attempted to explain herself. She said Charles was always busy with duties, with the weight of the crown, with his own health struggles. She claimed that she had acted out of love and care, wanting to ease his burdens. She argued that she had only tried to modernize things, streamline the management of the royal legacy, and free resources for charitable projects he cared about deeply, especially environmental causes. But Charles did not see assistance. He saw betrayal. He reminded her of the importance of those items. The coronation jewels, the pearls, the Scottish lands. They weren't just valuable, they were history, memory, and his mother herself. And she had signed away control without even asking him. Camilla countered, her voice rising. She insisted that the monarchy could not live forever in the past, that holding on to the old ways too tightly would make them appear stagnant and outdated. She argued that modernization was necessary for survival, that she had the crown's best interest in mind, and that Charles himself had always talked about moving forward. But Charles's heart was already hardened. He had endured years of scandal, public criticism, and pressure. But this was trust broken in a way he could never forgive. The quiet betrayal, the secret deals, and the deception were too much. Finally, with calm but absolute finality, he told her, "You can no longer be trusted. Not with me, not with this family, not with anything my mother left behind." Silence filled the room. Camilla's confident facade crumbled. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that no argument, no justification, no declaration of love could undo what had been done. Her world, built carefully over decades, was beginning to collapse. The fall of a queen. Within the palace, the ripple effects of the confrontation spread quickly. Staff noticed Camilla's absence from key meetings. Her name disappeared quietly from schedules and official agendas. Public events continued, but without her presence. Rumors circulated. Was she ill? Had she stepped back voluntarily? Or had something more serious occurred? Behind the closed doors, Anne made sure every royal advisor saw the evidence. The offshore accounts, the secret transfers, the shell companies, everything was laid out in full detail. Camilla's plan to create a private empire with her sister Annabelle, her son Tom, and her daughter Laura had been exposed completely. Some advisors hesitated. The monarchy had already faced turmoil after Elizabeth's passing. Could it survive another scandal? But Anne silenced all doubt. If we protect her, we destroy everything my mother built. The legacy must be preserved. The decision was made. Camilla would keep her title in name only, but lose all influence. She would no longer attend public duties, she would no longer manage royal projects, and she would be removed from sensitive decisions. When Charles told her in a final meeting, Anne was beside him, a silent but unwavering witness. Camilla sat pale and trembling. For years she had fought to prove herself, to be more than the other woman, to finally earn her place. And in a single moment, she lost it all. There was no fanfare. She left Windsor quietly that evening. No guards escorted her. No farewell statements were made. Only her sister Annabelle waited, the last person in her corner. The days following Camilla's removal were tense. The press speculated endlessly. People noticed her absence, asked questions, and shared theories. But inside Buckingham Palace, the work of undoing her plans continued silently. The jewels were secured, the lands returned to proper management, and the accounts frozen. Camilla's family projects, luxury resorts, art galleries, private ventures, collapsed without royal backing. Tom faced challenges in his culinary ventures. Laura had to sell part of her art collection. Annabelle's design contracts disappeared. The empire they had dreamed of vanished almost overnight. Charles, though relieved that the legacy was safe, carried his own pain. He had defended his mother's memory, but lost the woman he once loved. At night, he sat alone in his study, staring at the portraits of Elizabeth, reflecting on what had been lost. He had done what was necessary, but it came at a high cost, love sacrificed for duty. Anne, too, felt the weight of the conflict. She had acted decisively to protect her mother's memory, but exposing her brother's wife was not easy. She found solace only in knowing the legacy was intact, that the crown remained untainted. Camilla, isolated in her retreat at Highgrove, was left to reflect on her choices. Her ambitions, once so carefully plotted, had failed. She had sought security and power for her family, but ended up alone, shunned by the very institution she had tried to shape. The public soon caught wind of her absence. Some felt sympathy, seeing her as a woman punished too harshly. Others viewed her as a traitor to tradition. But one fact remained unchallenged. The crown and its history were safe. Lessons in loyalty. In the months that followed, the monarchy slowly regained stability. Charles reappeared at public events, Anne by his side, showing the world unity and strength. They reinforced the message that the crown must be respected, that tradition and history cannot be violated. For Camilla, every attempt to reclaim her influence failed. She was remembered not as the queen who stood beside Charles, but as the one who overreached and paid the price. Her family's schemes unraveled, leaving them struggling financially and socially. The monarchy, though scarred, grew stronger. Charles focused on his charitable work, expanding initiatives in environmental conservation and public welfare, while always honoring Elizabeth's legacy. Anne maintained her role as the family's guardian, watching closely to prevent any future breaches. The story of Camilla's ambition and downfall became a cautionary tale. Power borrowed from trust can vanish in an instant. In the world of crowns and thrones, betrayal never goes unnoticed. For the Windsor family, the lesson was clear: loyalty and duty outweigh ambition and greed. And for the public, it was a reminder that some legacies are sacred, untouchable, and must be protected at all costs. Hence, the crown endured. Camilla's gamble failed, her influence disappeared, and the monarchy emerged stronger, more united and vigilant. The past remained honored, and the future, though challenging, was guided by loyalty, respect, and the lessons of betrayal. As the dust settled over Buckingham Palace, one truth became impossible to ignore. Some lines in history are never meant to be crossed. Camilla had gambled everything on ambition, but the crown, the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II, and the trust of her family were far stronger than any personal plan. The jewels, the lands, the treasures of the past, they remained untarnished, protected by those who understood that power without loyalty is empty. Charles, though heartbroken, had made a choice that would echo through the ages. Love and duty can collide, but duty must always come first when the weight of history is at stake. Anne's vigilance, William's quiet strength, and the unbroken line of tradition ensured that the monarchy would survive this storm, more united and resilient than ever. But as the world watched, whispers persisted. Could ambition ever be fully contained? Could the scars of betrayal heal? Or would the memory of this clash linger in secret corridors and royal halls for years to come? For Camilla, Highgrove remained her exile, a reminder of what was lost. Yet in the shadows, some plans never truly die. And so the question hangs in the air, daring the curious to wonder, when ambition meets legacy, who truly wins, and who will rise from the ashes next?